There's so many benefits to just shutting up. Most people make the assumption, people are like, oh, I'm not a good negotiator. I'm not fast on my feet. I'm not a fast talker like that. I'm like, actually, the most effective negotiators are really boring to watch. They are quietly confident, but we feel like we need to fill that space. Otherwise, I'm going to look stupid. But you're going to look more stupid if you're thinking and talking at the same time. There's a number of reasons why we called the book Say Less. Number one was...
We're joined by Fotini Iconomopoulos, a high-stakes negotiation and communication strategist who's helped Fortune 50 executives and global teams unlock success. As the founder of Forward Focusing and author of Say Less, Get More, Fotini shares her unique blend of strategy, emotional intelligence, and practical frameworks to elevate your leadership and negotiation skills.
Always men have negotiated way harder on compensation than females have. What would be your sort of feedback for being able to equal that playing field a little bit?
So the number one thing I would tell, especially women, the two most powerful words of negotiation, which are because whatever comes out of your mouth after those two words is going to be credible, it's going to be objective, and it's going to be fact-based.
How do you kind of work past for people who have the feelings of when they hear negotiation, where they're like, I'm just not a negotiator?
I say, have you ever spent time around children? Because they are negotiating with you all the time.
Talk to me a little bit about that 4-step framework, why that's so powerful in terms of negotiation.
So I came up with my 4-piece framework. It was and then I couldn't think of a P for the last piece, so it just became communication.
Welcome back to another episode of Built for This, Stories of the Maverick, where we dive into defining moments, mindset shifts, and scaling strategies that shape resilient leaders. Today, I'm super excited to speak to Fotini, a high-stakes negotiation and communication strategist who's been empowering Fortune 50 executives, entrepreneurs, and global teams for over a decade. She's the founder of Forward Focusing and the author of the bestselling Say Less, Get More. She brings a unique blend of sharp strategic thinking, practical frameworks, and deep emotional intelligence to every negotiation and leadership moment. We're going to unpack her journey from navigating corporate complexity to stepping into the global stages where she champions confident, clear, and compassionate influence. Whether you're heading into a tough business deal or just trying to hold strong in everyday conversations, this is going to be a great episode for you. I appreciate it. Well, I would love to kind of start kind of from the beginning in terms of sort of how you grew up. And obviously when you hear kind of negotiator, any tactics, generally for whatever reason, especially in TV series, you always see males as negotiators, not necessarily females. So I'm curious in terms of kind of, how you grew up and if there was sort of maybe your parents saw hints early on that you were going to be not the one to mess with in terms of getting what you want.
Well, I mean, I meet parents every day now who tell me my kid was so difficult, but after hearing you, I think, oh, well, they've got a good career ahead of them because kids are the world's greatest negotiators. But I definitely, I was in an environment where I watched by osmosis, like my father negotiated everything. It was very common in our culture and certainly in our household. My mother was more of that silent negotiator that people didn't realize that she was negotiating, but she was super effective at it. So in hindsight, I actually realized how much I picked up from her. But explicitly, it was something that I knew my dad was doing. And I was like, well, if he's doing it, I guess I should do it. I grew up in a very strict household. So in order to get out of the house, I had to negotiate my way out of the house. It was one of those things where if you wanted to go to prom, if you wanted to go to a friend's house, if you wanted to do anything, even to go away to university and get my first degree, that was all a real struggle. It was a negotiation to get out of the home. So that was part of the upbringing. And then we also grew up in a household where we didn't go home after school. We went to whatever the business was of the moment. So we had a restaurant or we had a coffee shop or whatever. So we were there. Like I was watching the vendors come in the back door and negotiate in the kitchen with my dad. That was just something that I had very early exposure to. So it was very normal for me to assume that I could negotiate anything. I mean, the first price is not the last price. That was what was going through my head as just a child with that, I guess, observation skills that I had in combination with the right environment.
I love that. And sometimes when we're growing up, we kind of see those dynamics around us and kind of either want to go polar opposite of kind of what we grew up with and do something totally different or kind of lean into those moments where we get to kind of capitalize on those skills. Was there anything in terms of a moment as you were growing up where it really clicked for you that you wanted to figure out how to use that skill from a business perspective and lean into that in terms of a career trajectory? Or did you kind of like fall into it more sort of by accident?
I think everything in my life has been more of an accident. It's been very reactive. It's been saying yes to things or knowing what I didn't like as opposed to knowing what I wanted. So I grew up again in small business where we were there at our parents' feet all the time. And so when someone said to me, I ended up going to school for a degree in arts and science, not knowing what I wanted to be when I grew up, but knowing that I wasn't going to be a doctor because I'd passed out at the sight of blood. And knowing I did want to be a business person because business in my mind was that small business. It didn't have a consistency. It was wondering if your mortgage was going to come in. I watched my parents stress as small
Yeah.
business owners. So I never thought that would be me. So when I had a career counselor who helped me with all of these personality assessments and stuff, he said, you'd really be suited for business. You should do your MBA. I was like, what's an MBA? I've never heard of that before. I was an undergrad at the time.
Yeah.
So that I was very fortunate that I had people who engaged me in really interesting conversations and opened up my eyes to opportunities. So when, L'Oreal came knocking, I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to say yes. When a consulting firm came knocking, I was like, absolutely, I'm going to say yes. It was all of these things that kept happening that I put myself in rooms where I would see lots of interesting challenges. And when people offered me those challenges because they recognized my skill set, it was a very easy yes.
Yeah. Perfect. In terms of, that first job and kind of walking in, did you kind of feel like when you're completing your MBA that you were already kind of on the right track? And I love that you say, saying yes to every challenge. I very much relate because that's how I was always been. If I get a little uneasy, if I feel like, well, I'm not sure I can do this, I just say yes and I dive right in and I'm like, I'll figure it out and kind of move from there. In terms of kind of, that skill set that really shone through, can you give me an example of maybe where it sort of clicked for you where you're like, oh, this is the thing that I'm really good at, and now I'm gonna kind of continue to build that sort of muscle and really drive my career through this?
It was a culmination. So I started a business with my dad when I was in high school. So we were always in the food business, and then I ended up getting a part-time job during the school year because we had seasonal summer businesses. I lived in a tourist area, and then I wanted to make money in the winter, so I got a job at the mall, selling leather jackets. And then a year later, my dad came home one day and he said, "I need you to quit your job." And I was like, why? He said, because next month we're opening up our own fur and leather boutique. I go, what do you know about leather and fur? And he was like, I know I have a smart kid, so why should you be making money for someone else? And so that was kind of like I didn't really have a choice in the matter. It was thrown off the deep end. When I was at L'Oreal, they kind of threw me in one of the biggest accounts, and I just kind of had to say yes because I wanted to prove myself. When it was this consulting firm, it was just constantly one after another, people throwing me off the deep end because they saw my skills before my brain could catch up. And then when the consulting firm came, they were this negotiation training company that had been hired to teach us to be more effective negotiators. We went through this intensive 4-day workshop. And I knew I wanted a career change. I just didn't know what it was. I felt like I was back in university where I was like, what do I want to be when I grow up? Because I didn't feel like I was in the right fit. And they said, you should really be doing what we do. And I was like, yeah, sure, someday. And they said, no, seriously, you should be doing what we do. So it was really other people that helped me to identify that stuff. But once that last one came in, when that consulting firm, when these guys who were all 15 years older than me and told me they were working with CEOs all over the globe, I was like, well, if they're saying it, then I guess I should really do something with this skill set because it was a confirmation of multiple experiences already. So that was kind of the climax of, I guess I really should be pursuing something that's really different and with this specific skill set that I think I can help people with.
Yeah. And I think, were you naturally always kind of open to other people's feedback and direction? Because I find sometimes a lot of people are sort of stuck. And like you mentioned, I don't really know what I want to do. I feel stuck. And you mentioned being lucky to have these people around you kind of poking at your skill set or like throwing you off in the deep end. Not everybody is as open to that as, you were resistant. So, you know, just because of how you grew up, do you think that was like innately in you to kind of just get pushed and accepted, or sort of how did you kind of go about that?
I kind of have two minds about it because I was quite rebellious. Like I didn't follow the norm when it came to the traditional immigrant kid upbringing, but I was super open when it was someone that I admired and respected. So I didn't want the people in my everyday life to be able to tell me what to do. But if it was someone I put on a pedestal, someone who went, oh, I really have something to admire about this person, or they're doing something unique, I really wanted to hear what they had to say. So it was kind of a combination of those two things. I think it was an ability to filter through, here's the noise that you don't want to listen to, and then hear some of the noise that you do want to take into account. But instinctively, I knew I had a reaction to some of those things more than others. So it was, I think I had a really effective filtering system for all of these things.
Yeah, I love that. And then in terms of, you mentioned the consulting firm and then the negotiations and kind of like seeing these men being able to work with all these CEOs all over the world. Um, what made it clear that that was kind of the jump for you to go into and kind of activate that muscle that you had already kind of been like poked at, like, hey, you're really good at this, but now, okay, I'm going to make that leap, and this is going to be sort of the thing that sort of launches me into this world in a really big way.
I don't know that I felt like it was the right thing per se, but I felt like, what do I have to lose? Like when I look at things, I go, what's the worst thing that could happen? And in my mind, the worst thing that could happen was I was going to build a really cool network. I was going to develop a really great skill set. I did have some fear that it was a lifestyle that wasn't sustainable because as much as I love traveling all over the world, I didn't know if I would get tired of that. I heard other people who did. In fact, when I accepted their offer, that movie with George Clooney, Up in the Air, had just come out. And so people were like, "Can you imagine having that life?" And I was like, "I can imagine having that life. It looked really exciting to me," but I could see the downsides to it as well. So for me, it was like the worst thing that happens is this doesn't work out and I go back and finding a job in my industry. Like I didn't see any downside to it. I could only see upside, except for maybe I won't like it and I'll just go back to what I was doing before. I never thought I would be worse off than where I currently was in that moment. And I think that made it very easy for me to say yes.
And in terms of kind of maybe what was the biggest learning curve as you started to do that and kind of get into these boardrooms? And I think for a lot of people, even kind of coming from my side of a clients that are working with entrepreneurs, you see a lot of teams that have a lot of fear of kind of that C-level suite, especially the founder and our CEO is this kind of big, scary person. And so now you're coming in from this negotiation perspective, supporting on deals or training. What were kind of maybe some of the challenges that you didn't maybe foresee that were going to be really big learning opportunities for you?
I could foresee them, but I didn't know how to handle them is the bigger challenge in my brain was I knew there was gonna be ageism, and I knew there was gonna be gender bias because the guys that I worked with were all, again, 15 years older than me, and they were men.
Yeah.
So, just like you said, we didn't see a lot of role models who looked like me, and if I didn't see them, these other guys that I was gonna walk into these boardrooms with certainly had never seen them. So I was gonna be this foreign entity to them. But I had enough confidence because clearly my colleagues saw something in me. Clearly my former employers saw something in me. So that built enough to go, I can get myself in the room, but how in the heck am I going to deal with the challenge when they make my life difficult? I knew that it was not going to be easy. I knew there was going to be additional challenges. Some of them still surprised me. I talk about them over the book, and some I reserve for sharing with friends over cocktails. But that was I knew it was gonna be the big thing going in, but as long as my mentality was braced for that, it wasn't insurmountable. Like, it wasn't a shock to me, even though some of the things they said were shocking. But I knew I was gonna be able to do it because I had enough of those folks who were propping me up to go, "Clearly, you deserve to be here." So if they believed it, I had to believe it.
Yeah. And I know some of the examples are in the book, but maybe if you can share one of them, because then I would love people to hear that piece if they hear themselves in that story, but then also, okay, I got to pick up her book and then now hear all of it in its entirety. But if you can share kind of one good example of, either one that surprised you or one that's in the book in terms of that kind of like, uh-oh moment.
My sister remembers this one better. I remember telling it, but my sister says this is the most memorable to her. She's like, "Oh yeah, what happened that time when that person called you this?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." I remember being in deep in the heart of Texas, oil and gas country. A bunch of dudes with white hair had never seen anyone that looked like me with a name that they couldn't pronounce,
Yeah.
and they literally said the words, "What are you going to teach me, little girl?" So they were saying the quiet part out loud. And
Yeah.
today, it may be not so unusual to hear people saying the quiet part out loud. I think we're living in a very different era, but
Yeah.
this was over 15 years ago where people were more polite than that. Even if they were thinking it, they weren't saying it.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I could have completely fallen apart. And that was the intention. Like, why does a bully bully? Because they can, because they want to get a reaction out of you. And when they get a reaction out of you, it drains your battery. Like I refer to life as charging your battery before you go in, the way you would charge a phone. So when they poke your buttons and they actually get you to fall apart mentally, it drains their battery, it gives them power, and then it allows them to take advantage of you and push you around. For me, there was an element of my brain that was prepared for it, and certainly elements that were still not prepared for it. But because I had anticipated something was going to come, maybe not that extreme. I knew I needed to respond in some way. It was either going to be silence or I ended up choosing, well, why don't you sit tight and find out? Because if I'm so confident I am going to bring something to the table, I need to behave that way. And it could be in quiet confidence and just like standing there and staring him down. It could have been something like, what is that supposed to mean exactly? And putting them on the back foot as opposed to me taking it and falling apart. I'm going to make you fall apart. So you can sit tight and you can find out and you can let me know later what it is you got from this. That's how confident I am about what I'm going to bring to you right now, what I'm going to teach you right now. But I still will tell you that there was a lot of mental stress in the moment, even though I carried myself well. It's still this internal battle of hold yourself, in this confident state, but what the heck just happened and how do I deal with this? But when you work those muscles enough, the one that says I can handle this kind of wins out. But you really need to mentally prepare for those moments.
Yeah, I always think the visual always comes to me of like the duck or the swan that's very stoic and still floating, but their feet underneath are moving really quickly. And like you can't see what's happening inside, but outside everything looks like a-okay, I got this handled.
Totally.
And so, how did it kind of transition for you from that role to really sort of, create the framework and sort of step into this kind of thought leader and really public presence?
It was another one of those happy accidents where I was always naturally trying to serve my audience. So I would stay in touch with my clients via LinkedIn. And again, LinkedIn was in its early days. It was basically Facebook for professionals because I knew these folks were going to move on to another company someday and I'd get an email bounce back. So how can I make sure I stay connected to them? And as I was coming across articles that I thought were interesting or anecdotes or nuggets that have worked in the field, I wanted to also stay in touch with my clients to give them reminders of the stuff that we learned together so that it wouldn't just be in one ear and out the other. So I'd start sharing stuff on LinkedIn or I'd stay in touch with folks. I remember answering my phone when I was on vacation in Barcelona when a client called one day and they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" I'm like, "Great, I'm on vacation in Barcelona." I was like, "Why are you answering your phone?" I'm like, "Because I really like you." And
Yeah.
I'm sitting down on a bench and I have time. So why wouldn't I talk to you right now? It was that kind of thing. I just built these really wonderful relationships where I wanted to continue to help them. And that meant being vocal and that meant being active in their worlds. And as a result of that, they just kept responding to it and asking for more. So when they went, "Oh, it's great that you trained our team, but you told us all these really cool anecdotes. Can you come help us in this real life negotiation?" Or, "It's great that you trained us. Now can you come and speak at this national sales meeting? Can you come speak to my women's group? Can you come do this other thing?" "Well, we don't have a team that needs a 4-day training, but we have a team that needs a little bit of an investment, but maybe not that intensely. Can you help them in some way?" And I was like, "Totally, I could help people in some way." And so
Yeah.
I kept finding these opportunities to basically help people. And people kept reaching out because I was putting stuff out in the world and I
Right.
was getting more attention on me. So when my alma mater reached out and said, "Can you come back and teach MBA negotiations?" I was like, "Absolutely. Let me find time in my calendar to do that." When HarperCollins reached out and said, "We think you should write a book," I was like, "Okay, let's figure out how to do this." But it was really just because I wasn't trying to make a name or a brand. I was just trying to help the people that I really enjoyed working with. And that evolved into something pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I always think it's interesting the more, and again, kind of going back to that, almost like that natural curiosity that you had and that like element of excitement, I think fulfillment you get if that's kind of what drives you of challenge and then serving as well of what starts to unfold just because you're naturally following sort of what lights you up inside and what has come about. And so in terms of the core principles of negotiation and how you started to create that framework, talk to me like a little bit about that four-step sort of framework and how that came to be and why that's so powerful in terms of negotiation.
I've learned a lot about adult learning over the years. I was always really curious, even when I was running someone else's workshop and someone else's script way back in the day. I was trying to figure out how do I make this easier for people to consume. So I was always paying attention to what are the academics saying? How do people learn more? How do I like learning? How do I bring them into it? And paying attention to some of the best practices. And one of the things that works is you find something that people can remember really easily. Alliterations are always great too. So I came up with my 4 piece framework because I was trying really hard to come up with the 4 Ps. It was power, people, process, and then I couldn't think of a P for the last piece. So it just became communication. I'm like, "Guys, I'm trying really hard to make this memorable, but communications is too important for me to jumble up the name of it and not have you actually remember what it's doing." So how can you come up with something that is easily memorable, that's going to be sticky. And more importantly, I had been in the worlds of training and academia for such a long time, where we give people a template for this and a template for that and a 100-page workbook and so on. But is it stuff they're actually going to use? How can I make this as succinct and practical as possible? So even like I have this 4-piece framework and I wrote an entire book about it. But when I get on stage, I'm not going to give you the whole book. I'm going to give you, of this group, of the power stuff that I talk about, what's the 1 or 2 nuggets that I know are going to be the most memorable, the most applicable? Everything's going to apply. I can find you a way to apply all of it, but I have a limited amount of time. So the thing that's going to have the most bang for my buck in terms of that time return, I'm going to choose those things. So it gave me kind of like I could create a puzzle that was 4 pieces, that was 100 pieces, that was 1,000 pieces, but it's still going to show up in that same 4-piece framework for people.
Yeah. And is there anything, I guess, what kind of pops up from an industry or niche perspective where you're like, you know what, this is where it really landed and where it was super applicable? Or because you've always been from a mindset of how can I help you, is it truly really applicable for anybody in any industry to take these and utilize them in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, marketers hate me because my answer is it applies to everybody. And I keep shocking myself with how it applies to everybody because I come from a commercial background where I worked, not only in my own small business and retail, but I worked for L'Oreal for a number of years. I was negotiating with Walmart. Like that consumer goods and manufacturing world was my world. And yet today, just this morning, I was doing a session for the Make-A-Wish Foundation because the people who fundraise over at Make-A-Wish are dealing with outside vendors. They're dealing with difficult people. They're dealing with people who deal with difficult, emotions and stuff in their lives. They're dealing with potential sponsors, individual donors. Everybody has a different mentality when they come to the table, but everything works really easily when you break it down to that 4-piece framework. So whether I'm dealing with doctors in Canada who don't actually exchange cash for anything because it's different than in the US healthcare system, the doctors are trying to get, how do I get my patient to take the protocol that I'm assigning them? How do I get the nurses to do this thing? How do I get the administrators to unlock budget for stuff? How do I get this other surgeon to cooperate with me in the operating room? It has nothing to do with money or commercial background. It has everything to do with there's an easy methodology to think about every problem you're going to have. And I'm so pleasantly surprised when I come up to these really weird scenarios in industries where I go, this works. This works for you just as much as it works for the people in the boardrooms.
And how do you kind of, work past for people who have the feelings of when they hear negotiation or they've had an experience with a former boss or been in rooms where they're like, I'm just not a negotiator. That's what like really assertive, like angry, manipulative people do to get what they want. And it's not really coming from a good place. And it's sort of like shady for whatever reason from like a business perspective.
Yeah, people have a real ick factor when it comes to negotiation because we've been bombarded with terrible role models. So I always make this joke that everyone's like, oh, your life must be so exciting. It must be like those shows like Suits and stuff. And I'm like, that makes Hollywood money. And that might be the role models that the people that you don't like in your personal world are using to try and get ahead. But that didn't work because it's effective. It worked because of the power that they brought in. So they had the power of age, they had the power of position, they had the power of authority, they had the power of gender, they had all of these things that are starting to be eroded. A lot of those things today would get you fired because we don't have a tolerance for those types of things anymore. But when I ask people and they go, I don't negotiate or I'm not good at it or I don't like it, I say, have you ever spent time around children? Because they are negotiating with you all the time, whether you're the mom or the auntie or the bystander or whatever, they are constantly negotiating for space, for attention, for all of those things. Have you ever spent time around a pet? If you're trying to get your dog to pee outside, that is a negotiation in itself. So, and these are much more cooperative scenarios. So if you can do those things, if you can have those conversations, if you can step on public transit and just hold your physical space without someone bombarding you, that is a negotiation in itself. And so if you can think of those everyday scenarios where you are just creating boundaries and advocating for yourself, you can take those conversations a step further and find, other boundaries and other ways of self-advocacy, because that's truly all negotiation is. It's not the banging your fist on the table stuff. In fact, that's the stuff that is poorly received today that might have been received 30 years ago. And that's one of also the reasons why I caution people when it comes to taking advice from AI or really old books, because negotiation indeed has changed. And so if AI is scraping the internet for lots of stuff that has been said with 1 million impressions over the last 3 or 4 decades, And our universe today is a little different than it was 3 or 4 decades ago. And maybe my book hasn't sold nearly as many millions of copies as some of the old bestsellers that are out
Yeah.
there. You're not necessarily going to get the best advice. You're just going to get the loudest advice. And the loudest advice isn't necessarily going to work for you.
And I'm curious because this comes up a lot, and I do a lot of talent acquisition, and then there always enters the negotiation phase when it comes down to offer and compensation and working that through. And, you know, always men have negotiated, from my experience, way harder on compensation than females have, or gotten like a much more, I would say, from a boundary perspective, like, no, really solid, like, I'm worth this. And if you don't want to pay me this, I walk. Where females, have generally been softer. And if they get a little bit like, okay, and sort of what would be your sort of, thought process behind that and feedback for being able to sort of equal that playing field a little bit, and for females to come in a bit stronger in terms of owning their power, but again, not wanting to come in as like a male does, like, I don't want to be the loudest voice at the table. I don't want to negotiate that way, but I do want to get what I'm worth.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're sharing is statistically consistent with what we see out there in the universe. And the reason behind it is because women have had experiences. They are valid in their fears of, if I push too hard, I'm going to be labeled greedy, aggressive, bitchy, any of those things. If I push too hard, I worry that they may rescind the offer. And so all of those things are legitimate fears. If you behave the way traditionally people have been taught to behave in negotiation, if you behave in a more cooperative and more modern way of negotiating, there is a lot less risk attached to it. So the number one thing I would tell, especially women, but anybody who feels themselves coming from a disadvantaged place, anybody who worries that they're vulnerable to retaliation or repercussions or consequences, make sure you go in there and understand your value. And that means getting validation from research. So go out there and find out what Glassdoor and Indeed and all of these things are saying. Go talk to people from your industry who can share information about what entry level versus senior levels and so on are going to look like. Talk to people who don't look and sound like you. So if you're a woman, don't just get other advice from another woman. She may very well be underpaid because there's a gender gap. Talk to other people who don't look and sound like you as well. Once you have that solid foundation, you've just charged your battery because you're like, yeah, I do have these experiences. I do have all this stuff, and I measure up to everything that's out there. Then I want you to add what I call the not average tax, because most of the research that you're finding out there is giving you averages.
Yep.
And if you are somebody who is prime for a promotion or a salary increase or a new job, you're not coming to the table because you're average. You're coming to the table because you're above average. So I want you to add that too. And then if you're worried that they're going to renege, they're going to think you're greedy or bitchy or any of those things, you need to make sure you qualify those things and you demonstrate to them that you know your value, that it is credible what you are saying. And you're going to start with the two most powerful words of negotiation, which are based on. Because whatever comes out of your mouth after those two words, based on, is going to be credible, it's going to be objective, and it's going to be fact-based, based on my experience, based on my knowledge of the industry, based on the research that I've done on this role, based on the information that you provided to me. Here's what I would expect for someone with my experience levels and all of these accolades and accreditations and things like that I have. The second you can build up your power first, do the research and show them that you've done the research, then you can make the proposal. You're doing this in such a cooperative way that says, I'm coming to you fact-based. I'm not giving you opinion. It's not, I think I deserve this. It's based on all of these things. This is what someone with my experience level gets paid out there. How close can you get to that to make sure that this is sustainable for us?
Yeah.
That way they really have no retaliation because you're giving them facts. If they want to mirror you back with facts, if you got the facts wrong, which I doubt, they can say, look, I know those are the facts, but this is all I can afford to do, or we don't have budgets like that. That's your moment. It's, instead of going, but how dare you, you're going to go, well, what can we do to make this more sustainable? What does the future look like? What does the trajectory look like? When are you planning to get more competitive? You can still be really curious and ask questions. They can't fault you for asking questions. Now, if you get like firing squad, how dare you do this? You need to tell me. That's not going to go over very well. But if you can go, well, I'd love to understand where that comes from. What makes you think that you're not competitive with others? How have you managed uncompetitive offers in the past? What can we do to make this sustainable? What does your turnover look like if you're not competitive? I would really love to understand how we can make this a long-term commitment for the both of us. And that's cooperative language. That's curious language. That is problem-solving language that reduces the risk of all of those fears that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's so great. And I love the curious question asking. And it's always the fine line of walking, of wanting to help people help themselves. But like, listen, if you don't come to me with these things, I can't go fight on your behalf for you if there is that unfair offer. And yeah, that's so great. And so in terms of, translating that from a boardroom perspective and going in with executives, and I mean, obviously there's negotiations happening across executive teams when there's disagreements, strategy. How do you come in and work with sort of that C-suite level to help them from, a business alignment and or growth perspective, kind of using that framework as well?
So it's the same thing when, I mean, usually I'm hired because, hey, we have a really big negotiation happening externally. Can you help us? But we have to iron out all the wrinkles on our own side of the table. If I have a much bigger challenge aligning my own client team than I do trying to get the person across the other side of the table to align with them. So it's me going in there and being curious as well. I'm helping them to see their power dynamics. I'm getting really curious. I'm the one kind of poking and prodding in a way. So it comes down to power first again. So when it comes to power, I start asking them questions to help reveal where their actual power comes from. If there's disagreements about where their power comes from, or someone says, "No, we don't have that power. We actually have no power." I'm going to start getting curious with both of them. Can you help me to understand that? You had something really interesting to say. Do you have a response for that? So it's helping them have more effective conversations. It's almost like it feels like therapy at times because I'm not there to give them answers. I'm not their industry expert. What I am, however, is an expert on how to have better conversations with one another. And so usually I can keep the temperature low in the room. I can ask a question that's not going to make people feel defensive. Even the same question coming from someone else on the team would be taken as a really defensive strategy versus, can you inform me? I really would love to understand something more about this. So just having a neutral party in the room can sometimes just make those conversations a million times easier. Sometimes it has nothing to do with my skill. It's just the fact that I'm an outsider and I have a little bit more grace given to me from the people in there than someone else would. It's kind of like when I think about it with my nieces are always on the best behavior and my godchildren and all that kind of stuff. Parents may complain about their children never being behaved, but when they're with outsiders, they're always on the world's greatest behavior. It's just the benefit that we have of being outsiders sometimes. But I have to work through those things with my clients. I have to help them understand their power and get them all on the same page about the power. Because if one person thinks they're super powerful and the other person thinks they're not powerful at all, the other party is going to see that disruption and they're going to go after the weakest link. So I need to get everybody on the same page. Then we all need to be on the same page about who are we dealing with right now? Who are the people
Yeah.
on the other side? How do we manage those people? With whom do we have these relationships? They're informing me, but I'm making them inform me and each other at the same time. Then we can align on the process, what's worked in the past, what hasn't worked in the past. And that's a bit of a negotiation for me to get them on board with some new ideas in terms of how to handle this.
Yeah.
And that is communication. Who's going to say what, when, where, and how? It's the same process, but it's really me negotiating with them to get them all aligned.
And I'm curious, have you ever experienced a situation where either from, a negotiation perspective, or let's just say that CEO that you've worked in where you've actually just walked, where there just is going to be like, I'm not listening. I don't like, yes, I want you in the room, but actually, no, I don't want to listen to anything you have to say. And whereas just like, I'm not going to get you to where you want to go. Like, this is a lose-lose.
I've never been that far down the road. I always do a scoping meeting up front. Like, I will never send a proposal out to anybody when they say, "Hey, can you come and help us?" I'll never say, "Absolutely, here's my fee and we're good to go." I'm always going to do that. Are we a match? And sometimes I've had to say no, where I say, "You know what? You don't actually need someone like me. You need to work on these other things first before you even bring in someone like me. Don't waste your money. And don't even waste your money on another negotiation consultant. You've got some work to do in this area, in this arena, and I'm not the right person for that for you." Or I get the sense that one of the biggest disconnects is when you get a really senior leader calling you in and saying, "My team needs help. I'm a fantastic negotiator. They need your help." And they don't want to be involved in the meetings, or they say they don't want to be involved in the meetings, but then they come and throw a grenade in the meetings. So it's really, I've learned that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so how do I get them in that early scoping meeting to say, are we a match? Here's how we typically work. And I
Yeah.
kind of give them a why to want to be on board with them and want to align with my stuff. If I get a lot of resistance, then it's going to be a no-brainer to say no. But I haven't yet in my career found the people that I have to say no to in that capacity. And it's generally because my whole career has been based on referrals. So good people refer you to good people.
Yeah.
And usually those people who worked in one company will bring me into 4 other companies along the next 15 years as well. So those repeat kind of clients, they do the work for me to get everybody aligned before I even have to walk in the room, which is great.
Yeah, no, definitely. I always say referrals are the best part of business because it makes things a lot easier. And I know we touched base on the women's side of things and kind of negotiating from an offer perspective. And I'm curious, kind of based on your framework and what you do, and sort of as you've taken main stages in terms of being able to really support women and sort of those equity-based deserving leaders. Obviously, there's still a lot of bias, but then there's diversity issues as well across teams. Have you been able to kind of create groups and sort of expand that message or work with, different women in a variety of groups to kind of help elevate that confidence through this framework as well?
Yeah, it's been, I'd say the most rewarding part of my career is helping women, especially young women. And so I was at an event a few months ago. I was in Calgary. I had done an event for the Canadian Women in Medicine. And it's one of my favorites because you get a lot of like smart, high achieving women in one room. And I'm like, this is paradise for me. And I did a session for them and I walked out of the room and this woman came up to me. She's like, "Oh my God, that phrase that you said, I've had it on a post-it because another friend of mine said it once and I didn't realize you were the origin of that phrase." So it's really cool when I tell people, spread it like the gospel, tell other people, like share your experiences, role model to them. That's what's really going to elevate the game for everybody. It can't be all centered around me. It needs to be other women helping other women. And generally when I get involved in a women's group, it really is that philosophy and that camaraderie that drives so much of the behavior. So it's been, I mean, that's been such a blessing to be able to see women spreading it like wildfire. It's very different than when I was a student because when I was coming out of my MBA, that was over 20 years ago now. Oh, that's scary to think. Um, I feel like when I was entering the workforce back then, there was an attitude from women that went, "Well, I had to go through it, so you're going to have to go through it too." Whereas today, it's the next generation is going, "What can I do to spare you from that?" And I understand why they had that attitude because if there was only one chair at the table, they were elbowing out the other person to get that one chair. Whereas today, we're going to add another chair or we're going to get rid of some of the other chairs to make room for the people who really deserve to be there. And we're going to try and make life a little easier for the generation behind us. And I think we're fortunate to be in the position to be able to help the people behind us. And I do think that every single woman I meet from now on is really embracing that and going, yeah, this is not a competitive moment for us. This is a moment of like lift all boats kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I've really seen that shift when I first started out. If people ask me like, "Oh, would you prefer to work with men or women?" I was like, "Men, 100%. It's way easier. I don't have pushback. I don't have somebody trying to kind of what felt like sabotage in a lot of ways and kind of prevent somebody from growing or potentially being what was perceived as a threat from, a work perspective." But even now, like certain industries that I feel are still heavily male dominated and, there is women breaking through and high achieving. And occasionally there is still some women that have that mindset a little bit still of a bit more competitive advantage. And what advice would you give for, I think, anybody still stuck or maybe perhaps having that experience still where they are elbowing for that seat and not necessarily doing the most to uplift and create more space for other women?
I would say there's two things that come to mind. One is make sure you power up. Make sure they understand the power that you bring to the table so that if they really do see you as competition, then they know they're going to have to work really hard or that you deserve to be in that room and they might back off of you and leave it alone because they
Yeah.
recognize that you are a worthy, let's say, competitor. I don't love the words competition,
Yeah.
but you got to make sure that they are aware of what you do because I think another issue that we have is women don't necessarily talk about their accomplishments quite so much.
Yeah.
My friend Lisa Bragg wrote a great book called Bragging Rights, and we need to get better at talking about those things. Again, not in a braggadocious way per se, not in an arrogant way,
Yeah.
but in a way that makes people aware of what we are capable of. Because we don't live in a meritocracy, and unless someone knows what you're capable of, they're not going to, it's not osmosis. They're not telepathic. They're not knowing what capable of. So make sure you find a way to weave it into conversation. Like I could very easily weave into conversation something like, of all the 170 industries that I've worked in, this one is my favorite. It's not me bragging going, "I've worked in 170 industries, listen to me."
Yeah.
But
Do
there's
you know who I am? Yeah.
all ways to weave those things in, and I think we need to get better at that so that we can power up our battery without having to do it in an arrogant way or without having to do it all at once kind of thing so it feels combative.
Yeah.
But the other thing is how can you make them an ally? How can you understand what is actually motivating them? And is there a synergy that you can help them to see where the two of you working together actually would create a much greater outcome? Because in the speaking world, I don't see any other speaker as competition. I see it as, hey, there's a lot of gigs out there. And if you've been in a room where you've done really well and you know I'm really good too, and you recommend me, then I know that you're going to get great accolades out of it too. They're going to be grateful to you for introducing them to me and vice versa. So there's opportunities enough for everybody in the world. If that promotion wasn't, if you're both competing for one promotion, when that promotion happens, if they know that you are somebody who is worthy because you've powered up and you made sure that they've known that, when the next opportunity comes along, they're going to be singing your praises if you're helping them to get to that place. But if you're both tearing each other down to compete, then you're both going to lose. So how can we find what is that common synergy? How can we get it on the same team? I know it sounds really Pollyanna, but there are ways to help other people see that I'm not the enemy. I can actually be a really great collaborator, and together we can actually accomplish even more stuff together.
Yeah, I know it's simple, but it's those things are so often missed. I think when people can't step aside their ego and again come back to that team player dynamic of, hey, things might work out way better and we can partner together and we could maybe 10x what they think we can do together. And it's going to be this
Yeah.
2-person woman team that's just going to totally shift everybody's perspective. And especially in a male dominated industry, you're going to stand out and then you're going to end up getting way more business than one person can handle anyways, because you've shown that you don't have to bulldoze your way into a room and prove that you're the smartest person by being the loudest.
Yeah. I mean, I work with a lot of women in male dominated fields. And I remember years ago, I was working with the women in law. And they said at this one huge downtown firm, they said, we have an unspoken rule that if someone interrupts a woman, one of us is going to say, I actually want to hear what Jenna has to say. Or someone's going to say, oh, Fotini did a really great job on that one. So if they are singing each other's praises, they're going to all do better. And it's going to go, oh, we need to pay more attention to the women in this organization as opposed to just one woman trying to stand up for herself. It really does become this reciprocal, collaborative, we can lift each other up kind of moment.
Yeah, that's really smart. I forgot about that one when you have to kind of have I'll call it your cheer squad in the room that will call it out and not just one person take all the, appreciation, but making sure people are recognized for the work that they did. Cause it's pretty easy in certain rooms, especially when there's a lot of male for that one male voice. It's always, especially they're usually in some sort of rainmaker role that they're getting all the attention and love to be in that space. And you're like, oh, I don't want to behave how he's behaving, but we need to draw more attention to another direction. I would kind of love to still continue more deep into sort of kind of practical takeaways and sort of those first action practices that you kind of talk about and sort of speak to a little bit more of the power of the pause.
So, I mean, this really came from I was working with a team down in Arkansas. I spent a lot of time in Arkansas where Walmart's head office is
Yep.
because every supplier down there has an office. And I was working with this one woman who was brilliant. She was so good. She was so analytical. And every single time Walmart would call her, she would fall apart. And so she would tell me this. And so I went to the internet, I printed off a picture of a pause button and I stuck it on her bulletin board right above her phone. So I said, every single time they ask you a question, rather than feeling like you have to fill that space, I just want you to take a minute and look at that pause button. And I think 7 years later, I saw her again at another event. She'd moved on to a different role, so she wasn't part of the team that I was working with. She goes, I had that pause button on my bulletin board and I still think of it all the time. And so I started creating these little cards for all of my events and for my students and stuff like that, that a little, instead of a business card, like it was a pocket-sized pause button, because it really does give you mental clarity in that moment. There's a number of reasons why we called the book Say Less. So number one was in those moments of stress when you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, can you just take a calming breath to allow the noise in that active part of your brain to calm down a little bit and give yourself a chance for your brain to catch up to what everything is doing, to give yourself the mental pep talk and so on. Just having that, breathing in for 4, holding for 6, out for 8, that can reduce a lot of the noise in your brain and help you regain that logical component as opposed to your emotions taking over. The other thing is most people make the assumption that, again, because we watch these terrible movies and TV shows, entertaining, not terrible. But they are fast talking. People are like, oh, I'm not a good negotiator. I'm not fast on my feet. I'm not a fast talker like that. I'm like, actually, the most effective negotiators are really boring to watch. And it's because they're taking their time. They are quietly confident, but we feel like we need to fill that space. Otherwise, I'm going to look stupid. But you're going to look more stupid if you're thinking and talking at the same time. So if you could just take a pause and go, I need a minute to think that through. And you look pensive and you go, the best solution is this. They're going to go, wow, they've thought about that solution. They're going to be on the edge of the seat until you come up with that actual solution. Or if they give you something, again, those bullying kind of tactics, and you just look at them and you say nothing, the more calm and confident you are in that pause, the more rattled they are. There's so
Yeah.
many benefits to just shutting up. And so take your time and think about what you want to say, and you're going to look far more confident than trying to think and talk at the same time. Because when we're thinking and talking, we might say something like, I think I could probably actually maybe do something around like this, maybe. And
Yeah.
you sound so incompetent. You sound so doubtful. But if you go, based on my experience, this is the best solution going forward. That's a very different perception that you're putting out there. And it just takes that pause to go, all right, what's in my brain right now? Sometimes the pause could be even physically writing it out. Because maybe you're the person who's super excited to talk to the person who's sitting across from you, and you just want to interrupt and jump in before this idea is out of my head. I'm an
Yeah.
ADHD diagnosed person. So like that is one of the challenges that I deal with every day. So I always have a notebook at the ready. So I write it down so I don't forget it, but I'm letting you finish and I'm not interrupting you. And that in itself signals, oh, wow, here's somebody I like talking to. Here's someone I trust. Here's someone who's acknowledging me. So it's a way to build trust. It's a way to maintain your composure. It's a way to look more credible. All of those reasons are the reasons why we say just take a moment and pause. You will look so much more confident and you will actually perform better as a result.
Yeah. And what about, body language? And I've been in some rooms where I've seen some great reads happen and some subtle things that I would like to think I'm pretty good at reading some shifts in body language to signal some different things going on and be able to kind of adapt and approach based on sort of, what I'm seeing or feeling. But for kind of people in a boardroom or in a situation, especially actually now that a lot of things happen virtual, especially interviews, what's some kind of great ways to help people sort of read body language across from somebody else above them to maybe sort of switch up their approach or, come at something in a different way to see if they're landing or anything's going on to kind of make sure whatever that conversation is the most successful.
I would say, I mean, one of the things to look out for is, are they tuning out or are they tuning in? So if they're tuning out, they're not making eye contact with you anymore. They're fiddling with stuff. They're maybe looking at their phone. Now, in today's day and age, looking at their phone might mean that they're taking notes because people like taking notes on their app. So it's very hard to decipher a lot of that stuff. I don't want you to spend too much time of your mental or too much of your mental capacity focused on that type of body language, but look for the blips. Are they suddenly starting to shift and slump in their chairs? Are they suddenly starting to lean in and looking more interested? Were they taking notes consistently and now they've dropped off and they've lost interest? Those are the things that we're looking for. It's those inconsistencies. When has something actually shifted? I would rather you put energy into also what is your body language telling them? So I've leaned back in my chair a couple of times. This taking up more physical space says I'm super comfortable and I know I deserve to be here, versus me hiding behind a computer and my shoulders hunched and trying to take notes desperately signals, the smaller the space I take up, the smaller I feel like I deserve to be there. And so it's how are you physically showing up that I think matters more importantly. I would also think about where you physically sit in the room. If you're sitting across from someone, it could seem more like interview-like adversarial. If you're sitting perpendicular, if you're both sitting at the corner of the table, that's where I try to place myself because now we're in conversation together as opposed to across from one another. If you want your boss to pay attention to you and notice when you speak up, when you do things, don't sit directly next to them at the long boardroom table. Sit in their eye lines of sight as opposed opposed to like, here, I have to turn my head and crank my head to try and see what you're doing. So it's positioning yourself for success, to be in the appropriate spotlight, to be the one that can catch someone's attention, that type of stuff, as opposed to, I hear a lot of folks trying to focus on, well, what ways are their eyes moving? That most of the professionals, like the CIAs and stuff like that, get it wrong 50% of the time. So spend your time and energy on projecting what you want them to see, and look for the inconsistencies as opposed to trying to decipher every little thing.
And I'm curious because comes up a lot. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, they're naturally, like, as you mentioned, a little bit ADHD and their brain's going a mile a minute. And sometimes presence for sure is something they have to really practice to be able to not be wanting to do 50 things at once and listen like, yeah, like in a meeting. But I find from, people who are reporting into them, I have no problem saying, hey, if you're really busy right now, why don't we just reschedule to when you have time and we can sit down and we can go through this. But a lot of people aren't confident to talk to somebody who they report into and say, hey, pay attention to me. Like, you're distracted and it's super frustrating and I need you to listen, especially when they have to like repeat what they already said 20 minutes ago because they weren't listening. So what would be kind of your tips perhaps to call that out in a way that maybe alleviates some of that fear or angst about changing that dynamic in a conversation with somebody you report into?
I would say, again, it comes down to prevention versus in the moment. So from the beginning, have you engaged them in the conversation? So from the very beginning, have you gotten like a yes from them? Are you curious about X, Y, and Z? Are you curious about, have you ever thought about what it takes to get such and such a client on board? And like, yeah, I actually have. Well, now let's launch into it. I have some solutions that I think are going to be, or like, can you find a way to make them part of the conversation early on so that they go, oh, I've been acknowledged. This is something that is going to be of interest to me. And that's going to sustain their focus for a lot longer. And then again, you may want to find a way to break it up. I'm curious to know from you folks, have you seen anything like that before? Have you seen anything contrary to like that before? It's a risk that some people don't want to take because they're like, what if they take over the conversation? You're in charge of it because of the types and styles of questions that you're asking. So every so often, you want to make sure you've still got them on board. Can you get a piece of feedback from them? Can you get a nod from them? Those are the types of things that I'd be looking for. If you see them like lacking in interest, I would try to do kind of like what my teachers used to do in class too. Like, hey, Jenna, I'd love to hear from you, but maybe not putting them on the spot. You could pay them a compliment and say, Jenna, I think you have some really interesting feedback on this, or you might have seen this in one of your clients. Tell us about a time when, and repeat it in case they did tune out. Because sometimes, despite our best efforts, our brains are going a mile a minute. So can you pay them a compliment to make them feel good about it, as opposed to, I'm calling you out because you're not listening? And can you prompt them a little bit, like give them the lead in case they are completely, because you were not trying to make anyone look stupid.
Yeah.
We're trying to make them want to be a part of this and want to be a cooperative part of this conversation. So give them the lead in, to give them that grace to re-enter the conversation.
Love that. And so as you kind of look forward in terms of sort of, your next chapter, the vision for what you want to do in terms of coaching and like a virtual events and impact, sort of what does the next chapter look like for you?
I mean, that's been the $1 million question for the last 30 years. I know the next chapter for me is more. And for me, that means more audience interaction, more conversations like this. I love to have my brain tickled by Q&As with audiences. I want to hear more of what they want. I've written one book. I'm really happy with how people have received it. I think there's another book in me, but I want to.
I was going to ask, is there a number 2 on the way?
I haven't started writing anything, but I would love to start writing something, but I feel like I need more field research in order to make that happen. I have entertained the idea of actually conducting research as well, like engaging a formal research company to help do that. But again, before I get there, I want to make sure I'm solving for the problem that people are telling me that they have. I can make some guesses based on a lot of experience, but things are changing, and I feel like people's problems are shifting slightly. So I want to make sure I really get the bullseye on that. So for me, it's just leveling up the number of engagements, the quantity of engagements I do, and leaving space for people to feed me with what it is that they want so I can help solve those problems.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the work you do, there's a lot of ways you could look at measuring success and quantifying it in a way that you kind of design. But for you, what's kind of the most valuable way that you measure success in terms of the work you do?
I mean, there's 2 ways, and they're both sort of quantifiable. One is the number of really lovely messages that I get from people who have been in my audiences to this day. People from 10 years ago are still writing to me saying, that thing that you said, by the way, I'm now promoted to this, this, and this. It's unbelievable when I get that kind of stuff. I mean, I've had even folks tell me things like, I left an abusive relationship. I got a client to finally pay me. I fired my first client. I created boundaries. I made X numbers of dollars because I advocated for myself. Like, those are so rewarding, and I still get a massive volume of those. So that I love hearing about it. If you're listening and you're one of those people, send me the notes. I love to get them. And then the other thing is, I'm doing it in such a way where I'm being compensated appropriately, so I have my work-life balance. Like, I'm taking off the entire month of August and sitting on a beach, to be able to have that lifestyle quantitatively is like, okay, I'm doing something right because I'm fueling the people in my audiences to do amazing things, and they're fueling me back enough that I can have a very comfortable life to be able to keep doing it.
Love it. And in terms of kind of, trends, and obviously AI being a massive component, and there's been, leaked emails from founders saying, you send me an email and how you're going to justify keeping your job with AI, not taking it over, that have gone viral, that obviously that shouldn't have happened. But in terms of as you kind of start to look, and you mentioned things are changing, how are you sort of looking at the AI and the speed it's going and the massive changes in teams, focus, size of teams, and sort of the work you do? How is that kind of shaping in your mind of what you're kind of seeing of where
I
we're
was
going?
I have a love-hate relationship with AI. If AI is listening, I love you. Um,
Exactly. Save me when you take over the world.
I think for me, it's a very valuable sounding board, but it needs a lot of verification, even when it is a sounding board for certain stuff. Like, I ask for citations, I double check those citations. So it can be really useful for bits of research.
Yeah.
I love it for ideas. I never really follow all of the ideas, but I do take it as a starting point for my own ideas and a starting point for other conversations. I do think that people are relying on it too heavily, and we've seen some really interesting studies as of late. It just came one I saw a few weeks ago that said, and I sent it to my nieces right away. When we rely on it too much, we're actually not forming the critical thinking pieces of our brains.
Yeah.
So I will never farm out the critical thinking piece. I will have it reflect something back to me as opposed to come up with this thing for me.
Yeah.
So I think that there's value in it. However, like I said, I have seen too many examples of where it gets it wrong. Like, I've been playing with it for so long to go, could I create a GPT that I feel comfortable giving to people to go, hey, this is Fotini's voice, but it's still getting stuff wrong. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, if you have to justify your job versus AI, you need to think about, what does your humanity and your relationships bring? Because I can tell you from personal experience, my clients could hire any number of consultants or speakers or whatever. It's the relationships that I built that got me to the place that I am today. My relationships with the Walmart buyers, my relationships with my clients, my relationships with event producers and speaker agents and all of that kind of stuff, where they go, we just like working with you versus someone else. At some point, AI is not going to do the whole thing. They're still
Yeah.
going to have to convince someone to come on board, and maybe AI will be your tool to speed up and become more efficient at some of those things that you do. But you are the one that has the relationship with the other human. And so, even when it comes to like social media, I know AI can do a lot of like creating the social media stuff and managing those types of things. It can automate a lot of things. You still need to be the person that convinces the person on the other side of the table to use those tools, skill sets, and so on. It can make us more efficient, but it does not replace us when it means that us is a relationship, two people who have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I want to kind of transition out and end with some sort of rapid fire questions before we officially wrap up here. Would love to kind of know, what's your go-to phrase or mindset when you feel pressure in a conversation?
My go-to phrase is one of two questions. How could we make that work? Or what about that is important to you? I'm just going to ask a question to keep it going.
Okay, love it. Okay, quick pause or power statement. What works best for you in tough moments?
Definitely a pause. But a pause paired with a confident look. A pause paired with confident body language, sitting up straight, eye contact, all of those things. A pause on its own isn't quite as valuable.
Perfect. One negotiation myth you wish everyone would unlearn.
Oh, that good negotiators are talkers. They're not. It's the opposite. If you can, like, I mean, I worked with Microsoft years ago where I begged them to put a pause button over the send button. Because if you could go back and edit yourself, do you need all of those extra words? Do you need all of that justification, or can you trim it down and sound a lot more confident?
Oh, yes. I can think of a couple of clients where I was like, did you really? You should just say that. Like, I don't think that was helpful. Perfect. Best book or resource beyond kind of your own that has shaped how you influence?
That's a really tough one. I had to think about that one a lot. I actually think it's going to be a bit of a bizarre one, but one of my favorites is called The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal, Dr. Kelly McGonigal. So learning, because negotiation is stressful, right? That's what causes stress. That's why so many people think they don't know how to do it or don't want to do it. So how do you manage your stress in a way that it doesn't hold you back from doing stuff? How can you get excited about something versus nervous about it and have a much better outcome? Because I mean, it highlighted some really eye-opening studies to me about how you can channel that stress into excitement and get better results. I think it can be life-changing.
Perfect. And last question, in your own words, define what built for this means to you.
I think ultimately we are all built for whatever we want to take on. The question is, how can you act on it? So I am built for this. You are built for this. Everybody's built for this. But what are you going to do to actually do it? I'm built to, if I look at my DNA testing, it says that I'm prone to building muscle. Well, that's great. But if I never go to the gym, I'm never going to build that muscle. So I might be built for it, but what am I going to do to act on it? So that's where my brain goes. Yeah, I might be built for it, but I need to activate it. So the next question becomes, how do I activate that?
I love it. And so whoever's listening, if they're like, I absolutely want to work with her, or do I have to be in a company, or does she do one-on-one sessions? What is the best way to connect with you, and how do you work with clients now?
So the best way to connect is on LinkedIn or Instagram or my website, of course, fotiniicon.com. I don't work one-on-one with clients currently. I don't see that changing in the future, but there may be some public stuff coming up. If you're based in the Toronto area, there's an event that I'm thinking of doing very soon. I'll make that announcement if you're on my email list. And I could be tempted to do group stuff in the future, but one-on-one stuff is cost prohibitive for people. So I try to put as much content out there as I can for free. And maybe in future, there'll be more content to come that you can get paid access to. But at the moment, it's really like convince your organization to bring me in, because that is the most cost-effective way to make things happen.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you taking time, and it was so great to learn more about you. And there's so many great snippets to take away for myself and anybody listening. So thank you.
It was absolutely my pleasure. I really hope your audience gets some nuggets that will make their lives a little better.
I think they will. Thank you.